Hello again from Kimmel Bay Church in North Wales. We're continuing our meditations with the title today of When God Asks Too Much of You. It's a strange title, isn't it? And we're basing our thoughts on Genesis chapter 22 and the first 19 verses. Genesis chapter 2 and the first 19 verses. And I'm going to ask you to press your pause button and perhaps read that whilst I wait. I'll be back in a moment. Right, you read Genesis 22, 1 to 19, and you'll see that that's the story of Abraham, who was asked, above all things in life, to sacrifice his son. What a request to receive, or instruction to receive from God. And the question arises, by those who've arranged these sessions, when God asks too much, what about it? Well, the simple answer is this. God never asks too much. He never asks too much of us. We're told that no temptation is too much for us, that we're unable to deal with. And also the same principle applies to what God asks of us. He does not ever ask too much of us. The qualifying phrase really that we ought to put over the umbrella of both those statements is, provided we seek his help and power and strength to cope with the situation. On our own, we are no good. On our own, we are helpless. On our own, we are weak. But with him on board, we are able to deal with temptation, and we're able to deal with this such as Abraham dealt with. And you'll see from the story that Abraham came through and God honoured his decision to obey. And I'd like to suggest this morning a kind of a pathway really that we might take. This is only one approach to this subject, I know, but I'd like to suggest a pathway that we might approach down the road towards this business of how much God asks us to do. First of all, let me suggest that we compare ourselves to Abraham and see that Abraham obeyed without question. But let us also perhaps put in place a framework of pathway that we can follow. And firstly, I would suggest that we assess the situation. We assess the situation rationally. You see, it may not be as it first seems, and there's a danger for us to panic when we think God is asking too much of us. And if we bear in mind that God will never ask too much of us, we need to perhaps assess the situation rationally. Have I really looked at this? Have I really sussed this out as to whether this is as I think it looks? Is it as deep? Is it as strong? Is it as far-reaching as I think it is? And I want to suggest that assessing the situation is a very good first step. And secondly, we might ask ourselves, well, how far will God test me? How far will God test me? Well, I want to suggest that God will test us. God will seek our obedience so that he can see how much we're prepared to commit to him, so that we will trust him fully. If you look at Abraham in this story, he didn't fail to trust God. He obeyed God, even to the point of being prepared to sacrifice his son. Can you imagine what that must have felt to Abraham? So we say that we assess the situation, and then we look at how far God is asking us to commit ourselves to him so that we will trust him fully. This is an acid test in obeying God. Thirdly, let me suggest that we decide then on a course of action. This is all very practical, I know, but sometimes we need to be practical, don't we? I would, a course of action. Don't look for dramatic things. Don't look for blinding lights. Don't look for dramatic happenings in our life. Often the remedy is within our grasp, nearer than we first think. Often the remedy is within our parameters to what God is asking us to do. Let us ever remember that he is not unreasonable. He is a reasonable God. He is a rational God. He is a loving God. He's a God who only wants to see our trust in him and our obedience to him. Next, having decided on a course of action, stick with it. Don't dither. Don't let's be doubting ourselves. Be positive, if you like. Be positive as we take such action or lack of action, whatever we feel God is leading us to, rather than panic and rather than despair and throw up our arms. Let's stick with it and not veer from the path, but go down that path of obedience to what God is asking us to do. And finally, have a post-mortem. Yeah, have a post-mortem. Yeah, you may well learn from this experience. You may well learn from this experience, as Abraham did, undoubtedly. Let us never forget that God is a merciful Heavenly Father. He's aware of our weaknesses, and always he is with us each step of the way. Jesus said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Jesus also said that through one of his servants, that we can do all things through him, all things through Christ, who strengthens us. Yes, he does. He strengthens you and I for the Christian life. And as we face tests in our Christian life, and we undoubtedly will, God has every right to test us. God has every right to test our love for him and our devotion to him. We need to be responding with trust and hope in God's purposes. There is a purpose in all that God does. There's another verse that says, all things work together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Is that you this morning? Has there been a time in your life where you've handed over to Jesus? If so, you'll be able to cope with this. You'll be able to see that whatever God sends your way, it's not too much. He won't send more than you're able to cope with. You can trust him. You can place your hope in him. Have a good day. Goodbye, and the Lord bless you.